Alright guys, this is Trilbee and just a really quick prologue to this review. This is my first video game review, so after this video is done I would hugely appreciate it if you could go down into the comment section and give me any feedback, criticisms, whatever. With my movie and television reviews on my other channel, I pride myself in giving in-depth reviews, so let's try and do the same thing for video games. Now, without further ado, let's play Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney on the Nintendo DS.
What many people don't realise is that Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney on the Nintendo DS, released in 2005, isn't actually an original game. No, in fact, it's an enhanced port of a 2001 Game Boy Advanced title. Never heard of the original? Then you probably live outside of Japan, because the Game Boy Advance title never saw a release outside the land of the rising sun. Originally released in Japan as Gyakuten Seiben Yomigaru Gyakuten, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney was developed in-house by Japanese developer and publisher Capcom, the same company that brought you Mega Man, Resident Evil and Street Fighter, just to name a few. The director of the game is Shu Takumi, whose previous works include Resident Evil 2, Dino Crisis and Dino Crisis 2, all three of which were very well received as well as commercial successes, but Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is the first game that he is the director for, but he's also the scriptwriter and even voices the titular Phoenix Wright in the Japanese version of the game. But enough with the backstory, let's get into the game. Court is now in session. You play as the titular Phoenix Wright, a young defense attorney just starting out. I need to get this out of the way now just to give the story and character a bit of context, but the Ace Attorney games are based around the Japanese legal system. If you are charged with a crime in Japan and brought to trial, statistics show that there is a 99% chance that you will be convicted. It's a system where even a victim of false allegations finds it almost impossible to escape conviction. Even some of the best attorneys in Japan go their whole careers without ever winning a case. There are no juries, and major criminal cases are decided by professional judges based on the evidence presented by defense attorneys and state prosecutors. It's such a thankless job. Your prosecutor rival, Miles Edgeworth, don't worry, we'll get to him soon, is a rich and influential man, whereas you, a defense attorney, can barely make any money. Aside from the obvious commentary on the Japanese legal system, Phoenix Wright is a fantastic character to be in the shoes of. You are definitely the good guy fighting for what is right and true, but you're also at the bottom of the food chain and working your way up in the eyes of your peers. It's a very rewarding character to play as, but in terms of Japanese cultural commentary, I'll touch more on that later when I talk about the characters. The game is based around the tried and true format of a classic point-and-click adventure game, but with a twist. The game is split into two halves. The first, and easily the weakest, is when you control Phoenix Wright in a first-person perspective and move around environments, talk to people, and find evidence. I say weakest because these segments aren't bad, far from it. They're actually very well designed in terms of linearity. This game is strictly linear. There is only one right answer. There's no leeway in how you progress, but the game does a very good job at guiding you in the right direction without actually telling you what you have to do. I have played many bad point-and-click adventure games where you have to click everything in every environment because you have no idea what you're supposed to be looking for, but Ace Attorney never really falls into that trap. However, later on in the game, objectives become pretty vague, and sometimes you have to present someone you meet with an item that you'd think they would have absolutely no business looking at in order to progress through the story. Objectively, these segments are well handled, but they do occasionally fall into the trappings that have permeated the genre since its inception. The second half of the game is what makes this game so goddamned awesome, and that is the courtroom segments, essentially glorified dialogue trees. These segments task you with taking all of the evidence, witnesses, and what you've learnt outside of the courtroom and proving your client is innocent, and this is where the game really shines. It doesn't just shine, it sparkles. You listen to witness testimonies, then you cross-examine that witness. You have two options with a witness's statement. You can either press them further for more information, which can often reveal more information and help you gain a broader understanding of what actually happened, and when you spot a contradiction in the testimony, i.e. the witness says something that doesn't add up with what evidence you possess, then you can object and blow a hole in the testimony. How do you do this, you may ask?
Well, it's simple. You have two options. You can either just be boring and press this button here, or you can shout objection into the DX's microphone. Now, this may sound like a really silly gimmick, and you would probably get frowned upon in public if you did this on a bus or something, but trust me when I say, this is quite possibly the most satisfying thing that you can do on a handheld.
And no, that is not sarcasm. There's something tangible and truly cathartic when you realise that there's a contradiction in what was thought to be a solid testimony. You honestly feel like you have earned the right to fight back, and just shouting objection is such a satisfying thing to do. What may at first glance seem like a gimmick is actually a very compelling gameplay component.
While the game is essentially a Game Boy Advance port, that doesn't mean it doesn't make use of the DS's unique features.
Of course, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney uses both screens of the hardware. The touchscreen is used to scan environments, press buttons and navigate the menus, but let's just talk about the menus. In the game you have something called the court record, which contains the evidence you've collected and character profiles on who's involved in the current case. Everything you have is in there, and the game is designed in such a way that everything you need to win the case is in there somewhere. Nothing is hidden from you. You just need to take a moment to just dig into the evidence. If you're struggling to find a contradiction or a key piece of evidence in the courtroom to turn things around, don't fret. It is in there somewhere. Anyway, the touch controls. The only negative thing I can say is that navigating the environment using the button interface is incredibly clunky and slow. It's not a deal breaker, and it probably would have been annoying to program and change this because this is a port of a game that only uses buttons because this was a Game Boy Advance title, but the slick interface and arrows of previous point-and-click adventure games are sorely missed. The buttons are just slow to use in comparison, but like I said, we are mainly here for the courtroom sequences, which are truly brilliant, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but they're intense. The music, the dialogue, the sound effects, the animations from the characters, it's just a pure presentational tour de force. There is a legitimate sense of satisfaction seeing a witness break down because you've done so well at your job. You figured out the contradiction, you presented the evidence, you proved your client's innocence, and you saved the day. But you can also make mistakes. If you present the wrong evidence at the wrong time, then the judge will penalise you. If you make too many mistakes during the trial, then you lose. While checkpoints are very far apart from each other, there is a flexible save system, so as long as you save regularly, then you'll be fine. At this point I would talk about the design of the game, but first I'm going to talk about the characters and the writing. This may seem strange, but it's important I talk about this first before I talk about the design. You'll see why later. But anyway, the dialogue is truly the star of the show here, for absolutely everybody. This was a Japanese game, so obviously it had to be translated, but it can't have been easy. Like I said before, there's only one route towards the end, and since the way the cases are presented means that pinpoint accuracy was needed to make the plot easy to follow, because you have to present for the right evidence at the right times, at the right cases and everything. But the localization team did a pretty fantastic job, despite maybe one or two spelling mistakes, but nothing that gets in the way. What's interesting about the game is the fact that it's dealing with the issue of murder and the legal system, but somehow it manages to be light-hearted and funny. It's really baffling how director Shu Takumi was able to create a script that was able to balance these two elements so elegantly, but there it is. It's a funny and entertaining game, but it never delves into bad taste. The cases fall perfectly into place and the characters are incredibly well written. There isn't a single character here that isn't memorable or unique in some way. The main character is Phoenix Wright, and let me just say, he's a really funny and likeable guy. He definitely plays the straight man to all of the anime style shenanigans happening around him, and his internal thoughts are legitimately laugh out loud funny. The judge is also really funny as well, an old man with a good heart and a prevailing sense of right and wrong, but clearly not the sharpest knife in the drawer. You also have your companion, Maya Fey, a young naive spirit medium who helps Phoenix. She's also funny and her interactions with Phoenix are genuinely heartwarming at times. There's also the hapless but kind-hearted Dick Gumshoe, the head of police. While he's also a very funny character, when you dig deeper there's actually a lot to him, and this is mainly due to the Japanese setting. See, around the time this game was originally released in Japan, public confidence in the Japanese police force dropped below 50%. Since the late 90s, crimes in Japan have surged by 150%, and the public did not feel that the police were up to dealing with the complexities of modern crime. The game's unflattering portrayal of the police reflects the growing public discontent over their performance. A little bit of context goes a long way in understanding why Gumshoe acts the way he does, and why people treat him like they do, and by the end of the game, you kind of feel sorry for him. And of course there's your rival Miles Edgeworth, one of the more compelling anti-heroes ever put in a game. Sure, he's your rival and initially he seems to be like a cold dick, but as the game progresses we learn more about who he is, what his background is, and he becomes a very likeable character, yet still a compelling rival. Out of all of the characters in the game, he is easily the most fleshed out, as he undergoes a full story arc and transformation throughout the game. I should also point out that there's very little voice acting in the game, but I always imagined Edgeworth having the voice of Seto Kaiba from the English dub of Yu-Gi-Oh!, where he was played by Eric Stewart. And now with the main characters out of the way, it's time to talk about the cases themselves. There are 5 cases, each of varying length. The first is a tutorial, whereas the rest are full-on investigations. While 5 cases might not seem like much, to complete them all on your first playthrough, it'll probably take about 15 hours, maybe more. There isn't a bad case to be seen here. They're all brilliant, but Chapter 4, Turnabout Goodbyes, is easily the best and probably one of the best standalone segments I have ever played on a handheld. It's a long case, dealing with some old faces, some new ones, and even sees Edgeworth on trial with seemingly no way out. Old wounds are reopened, character arcs are fully resolved, and the chapter even ends with a full resolution. There's a tearful farewell, the game tells us what happened to all of the characters after the trial. It's a fantastic ending, and truly satisfying. Then the game keeps going for a final chapter. Yeah, it's worth noting that the original Game Boy Advance game ended with this chapter, but for the DS version they added a 5th one, entitled Rise from the Ashes. Don't get me wrong, Rise from the Ashes is a really good chapter, although it is a bit too long. The chapter makes good use of the DS hardware, with 3D clips, microphone support, and added touch controls for forensic segments, which are fun to utilise, but on a narrative level, it's a disappointing conclusion to what has otherwise been a fantastic narrative. You get a new companion, Emma Skye, who's not nearly as endearing as Maya, the villain isn't nearly as awesome as the one from the previous chapter, and Phoenix has no personal stake in the case. In Chapter 4, he was trying to prove the innocence of one of his best friends, and his friends were all there for him in that case, but there's no personal sense of tension. It's just a really difficult case for him. There's no genuine attachment. I just want to stress, Rise from the Ashes is a great chapter, but compared to Chapter 4, it isn't nearly as powerful on a narrative level, and as an ending, it just drops the ball and gives us an anticlimax. Maybe if it was presented in a different context, it wouldn't be so disappointing, but for me, I think it's a legitimate complaint. But anyway, let's talk about the presentation. You take one look at the game and you can tell it's Japanese. Not just because of the art style, but because of the truly inspired character designs. The animations are simple but get across a huge amount of personality, camera shakes are well utilised, as well as the manga inspired speech bubbles to get across the bigger moments, and seeing the bad guys break down once you have them cornered really is something that has to be seen in the context of the courtroom to truly appreciate how satisfying it is. There aren't many cutscenes, but the ones that are there are heavy in atmosphere and definitely take inspiration from classic noir films with their cinematography and music. Speaking of music, it's no secret that what is essentially a Game Boy Advanced game isn't going to have great sound clarity, but Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney overcomes this limitation by turning it into an advantage. As opposed to having multiple track layers and complex tunes, it's more reliant on strong melodies and timing. It makes great use of silence as well, as music cues are implemented perfectly. Now, before I play you this clip, I just want to say something. Phoenix Wright's Objection theme from the first game is easily the best track in the entire series. However, with its sequels, the track changed and, quite frankly, it wasn't as good as before. Let me be blunt, Capcom. With Ace Attorney sequels, you can change some of the tunes, improve the graphics, add new characters, etc., do whatever. But do not fuck with the Objection theme.
Objection!
I honestly think that if this theme was introduced outside of the confines of the Game Boy Advanced hardware, then it would have gone down as one of the great modern video game themes. It's simply a brilliant piece of music, and composers Masakazu Gomimori and Ayoto Tananaka really went above and beyond here, but the placement of the music is just as important. Sound effects are also very well used and are used to permeate some of the more bombastic moments. This is definitely a game that you play with headphones. It is a great presentational package and makes great use of its limited hardware.
And that's all I have to say about the game. So here's my conclusion.
Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney is a fantastic game, and I can guarantee that you will never experience anything else like it, with the exception of its sequels of course. While its base gameplay is satisfying, fun and well implemented, it's the writing, the characters and the odd quirks that will keep you coming back for more. I wish Chapter 5 was more well thought out, and a few of the investigation sequences can be tedious and sometimes a bit too vague, but those complaints aside, this is a great game, and should be experienced by anyone who is looking for great narratives in video games.
And those are my thoughts on Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney on the Nintendo DS. Now, I bet you're thinking, my god, Trilbee really is correct and right about everything. Where can I play this fantastic game that he has opened my eyes to? Okay kids, this is where it gets complicated.
You see, the game has truly resonated with a Japanese audience, so there are countless ports of the game. Of course there's the Game Boy Advance Japanese version, and the Nintendo DS port, but you can also download the game on WiiWare for 1000 points. However, the Wii port is just the DS version but on a big screen, and I've heard that the port isn't very good technically. You can, however, download the whole game on your iPhone for about £3 to £4, which is an absolute steal. Like I said, it's about 15 hours, but of course you can't shout into the microphone. That feature only exists on the DS. In Japan, it's also available on PC, and there is a version for other mobile devices. If you want to play the DS version though, it's not that easy. The game is pretty rare because it's out of print, and because it's more of a cult classic, it can be a bit pricey depending on where you go. But if you see the game for about £15 or £20 pre-owned or something, then I do recommend you buy it, because it is a lengthy game, worthy of the price tag, and there is a possible resale for a profit if you need that extra motive. But in Japan, the series has become hugely popular. Last month it celebrated its 10-year anniversary with the announcement of a 5th game in the series. There's been a Phoenix Wright stage musical, manga adaptations, the main character has made appearances in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, SNK vs. Capcom Card Fighters DS, and later this year he will team up with Level 5's Professor Layton on the 3DS in my most anticipated game of 2012. This month also sees the release of a Japanese live-action Phoenix Wright movie, based off the cases from this first game. The movie will also see a release in the US this summer, and a UK release date will be announced in the coming months. It's really amazing how a franchise can make such an impact outside of the core games, and it's definitely well deserved. I love this series, and I hope this review has convinced you to track down a copy of the game. Whether you play it on DS, iPhone or the Wii, I can guarantee that you will have a good time, and if you don't, well...
Objection!
Trumpets!